In the past few years, the conversation around most media, especially from the more conservative side of the political spectrum, has been about the wokeification of everything. Every time a new Disney movie comes out, there are dozens of headlines and clickbait thumbnails that are starting to get really annoying. One of the biggest bastions of this behavior is the Daily Wire, who I'm sure you're familiar with no matter where you fall on the political spectrum. Now, to combat all of this wokeness, the Daily Wire started making their own movies and shows, but the main one I want to talk about today is their new adult animated show, Mr. Birchum, and why it fails as right-wing media, especially compared to an anime like Spy Family. Let's start off by giving context for the show for those who don't know. Mr. Birchum follows a no-nonsense high school teacher who doesn't understand the world he's in and is constantly clashing with the inclusive ideologies of the school-appointed social justice warrior Carponzi. It's exactly the type of show you'd expect the Daily Wire to make. It prides itself on being anti-woke, owns the libs with its jokes, and stands up for traditional conservative values. The problem is that's where it ends. Based on the trailer, there is no deeper plot, no meaning to be found. It simply serves as a vehicle to deliver some checkmate liberal type jokes, which if you pay attention is exactly what the Daily Wire claims liberals do, just in the other direction. Another question I have to ask is, who's this show for? It's clearly not for the Gen Z audience like myself. The answer is actually quite simple. The target audience is the conservative boomer, which is clear to see based on how Mr. Birchum himself interacts with his son who streams and his students who are always on their phones. Slight side tangent, I also feel like the term woke has lost all meaning and is just the new way for conservatives to say that they don't like something. Most of the time when woke is used to describe a movie or show, it doesn't make any sense. There are some cases where it does ring true, but those are becoming less and less the case because the term is being used for so much nowadays. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that Mr. Birchum just looks bland. There's not much that separates it from other animated adult American shows, which speaks more to a general lack of respect for animation as a storytelling medium. Another issue is that if you're someone who doesn't fall into the show's target audience, but you don't want to watch the liberal-infested content, there aren't any other alternatives for you. The right claims that the liberals don't know how to make media in one breath and then pump out stuff like Mr. Birchum in another. Now, let's talk about how anime can be far better right-wing media than shows like Mr. Birchum or any other conservative media. Speaking for myself as a Gen Z consumer of media, I've all but ditched Western media entirely, give or take some exceptions here and there. Why did I do that? Because Western media is either promoting beliefs I don't personally agree with or is creatively bankrupt. So much of our content here in the US is just a vessel for pushing messaging and ideology around rather than focusing on telling a good story with good values. I watch anime because it has the capacity to not only be very incredibly animated, but also prioritizes telling its story over all else. Anime can transport me to these fantastical worlds where my imagination can run wild and I can be engrossed in a very captivating story. This is obviously true for actual fantasy anime, but also applies to more grounded shows like Horimiya. As mentioned earlier, in the West, we've become entrapped in the idea of pushing an ideology or agenda into every possible form of media, whereas anime doesn't do that. Western creators run off of DEI checkboxes, then kind of plan the story later, which is why so many people say that modern movies and shows are woke. This is also why you see so many popular characters get race or gender swapped. To the Hollywood hive mind, that's enough to check off their inclusivity box. Let's get something straight here. No normal person has a problem with black or female characters in movies and shows. The problem comes in when you simply take an existing character that everyone loves and change their race or gender rather than putting in the effort to make a new original character. Race/gender swapping is also really disingenuous to those groups of people, since you're basically saying that they aren't worthy of new characters, so enjoy this existing one that looks like you now. Take the live-action Little Mermaid, for example. Instead of creating a brand new African-American princess, they just race-swapped Ariel. Could people relate to that? Sure, I guess, but I would argue it'd be much more impactful to that community to make a new princess instead. Now, there is also a much bigger issue that we have here in the West of putting so much emphasis on race and gender. The whole reason so many existing characters get swapped around is so that those groups feel included and like they can relate to a character, but there's a lot more to relate to than just how someone looks. Do you think I relate to Deku because he looks like me? No, of course not. I'm not a 16-year-old Japanese boy with a cool quirk. What I can relate to, though, is the content of his character, a person who is selfless, encourages other people, and strives to always do his best even when the odds are stacked against him. Is there anything wrong with wanting representation in media? Absolutely not. I actually think we should have more representation in media since we are all made in God's image and have our own unique characteristics, which is something that should be reflected in the content we make. But back to anime, there are no DEI checkboxes. The main goal is to tell a really good story with fun and enjoyable characters, and that's what people relate to. Characters like Tanjiro, Luffy, Naruto, Goku, and Deku. If you look at some of the most popular anime of all time, they're usually praised for their ability to tell a really captivating story and just be good entertainment that is actually enjoyable. Shows like Attack on Titan, Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, Demon Slayer, My Hero Academia, Dragon Ball, heck, even One Piece all serve as good entertainment that above all else want to tell a good story that people can relate to and engage with. These shows all have worldwide appeal because they don't try to cater to one specific audience by branding themselves as anti-woke. A series like Dragon Ball didn't reach a worldwide audience because of its agenda. It got that by being a super entertaining show with really good fights that got you invested in the characters and constantly wanted to see more. A series so well known and enjoyed worldwide, by the way, that had multiple world governments and countries mourning the loss of Akira Toriyama when he unfortunately passed away earlier this year. That kind of success isn't found by trying to fit a political agenda into your series, regardless of which side you're on. Conservatives are always the first to call media woke and criticize it, but they aren't doing much better. Another leg up anime has is the sheer variety that can be found. Want to watch something with action? We've definitely got you covered. Want a wholesome slice of life about some girls trying to start a band? No problem. Looking for a deep introspective look on the dark side of the entertainment industry? Surprisingly enough, we have that too. In that variety, however, lies the fact that anime also has a lot more degeneracy in its sexual content or having entire shows dedicated to LGBTQ relationships. The caveat to that, though, is that it's very easy for me to avoid yuri and yaoi shows while still having plenty to watch, something I can't really say the same for in Western media. So many of our Western shows are plagued with sex scenes that, one, shouldn't be there, and two, are just uncomfortable to watch. I legitimately can't name one movie or show I've seen where a sex scene has added anything of value to the story or media as a whole. The opening line of that Family Guy intro has really only become more accurate over time.
It seems today that all you see is violence in movies and sex on TV.
Western media has also become infested with LGBTQ content, which is not nearly as well distinguished as it is in anime. It all goes back to those darn DEI checkboxes. These shows have to include LGBTQ characters or they run the risk of getting canceled, either by the studio, the fans, or both. This, of course, affects the story, since the creative people aren't allowed to be creative anymore. They have to find a way to shoehorn all the inclusivity into their project or it doesn't happen. Now, there's one show that I've neglected to talk about thus far into the video, and it's the one that's easily the most right-wing anime to come out in recent times, that being Spy Family. There's a reason Spy Family gained so much popularity here in the West, and that's because it's just a wholesome show about the importance of family with some cool spy action thrown in for flavor. It serves to fill the gap that most unsatisfied Western viewers were looking for, something that isn't trying to push an agenda, but promotes good family values and is just plain entertaining. Spy Family is also a very easy anime for non-anime watchers to get into. I've gotten countless friends and family to try anime by saying, hey, check out this cool show about a pseudo-family with a spy, assassin, and a telepath. It's now the first show I recommend to someone who wants to try out anime and see if they like it. Spy Family is refreshing because it drives home the importance of family, which is topical given how our society has put such a low value on having a family and spending time with them. As the series progresses, we see Lloyd, Yor, and Anya all grow attached to one another and start to become a real family, not just one for the mission. In that same vein, here are a couple more anime that serve as great alternatives to the subpar Western media and are far better than the right-wing slop like Mr. Birchum. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention one of the actual classics in Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, an anime that will definitely cost you an arm and a leg, but be so worth it. While this show does have a lot of political messaging, it's nowhere near like what we do here in the West. Fullmetal Alchemist speaks more to the reality of government corruption and its true role in our society. It also covers the guilt and consequences of realizing that maybe your orders aren't always right. Of course, there is a big family element with Ed and Alphonse since their whole quest began with trying to save their mother and having to live with the consequences of that. Now, if older anime aren't your cup of tea, which is really weird because Fullmetal Alchemist isn't that old, here's a more recent one, Frieren Beyond Journey's End. An endearing and emotional anime about an immortal elf who's trying to understand the fragility and finiteness of human life. While there isn't as much action as other shows, when it does pop up, it's awesome and will blow your socks off. Frieren could also double as a cozy anime since there are quite a few episodes spent doing side quests that really help to flesh out the world building and showcase the wonderful magic system. Of course, there's plenty more anime that fit into this category, including the ones I mentioned earlier, but Spy Family, Fullmetal Alchemist, and Frieren are a good place for you to start. Shows like those are exactly why anime will continue to beat out Western media, because at the end of the day, the focus isn't on shoving a political message down your throat, it's about telling a good, captivating story that wants to entertain you and offer you an escape from the stresses of the world. Western media, and especially so-called right-wing media, needs to step it up and follow the example of anime. Get back to telling a good, engaging story first, and then build everything else around it. But as always, I want to know what you all think. Is right-wing media doomed to fail? Sound off in the comments and let's try to have a civil conversation.